regional security. A failure to preserve the deal can only add further tensions to the regions. Mr. President, the time is finishing. The recent escalation we have witnessed has a broader regional dimension. Tensions in Iraq reflect several of the region's fractures and have the potential to affect difficult situations elsewhere in the region, from Syria to Lebanon to Yemen and beyond. In short, the stakes are extremely high for Iraq, for the region as a whole, for the world, and of course, for us. In this context, already for months, there have been calls for Europe, for the European Union, to play a bigger role. Given we speak to all means all, we are not, as a group, perceived as having a hidden agenda. Our partners see us as standing for dialogue and peaceful and negotiated resolutions of disputes. As I mentioned at the beginning, last Friday, I convened the extraordinary meeting of the Foreign Affairs Council. During the meeting, we once again reaffirmed our call for urgent escalation and maximum restraint. We also reaffirmed our steadfast support for Iraq's unity, independence and territorial integrity, and underlined our commitment to our partnerships with Iraq and to our continued support for the stability and reconstruction of this country. We also underlined our joint determination to preserve the JCPOA, which we strongly believe to be in all our shared interest and the interest of the region for peace and security. And we also were very clear that a durable solution to the ongoing crisis can only be regional, and that we would continue to explore the role that the European Union can play on that. So, with the strong backing of the Council and the Commission, I will personally continue to remain engaged on all of these issues, as I said, talking with everybody, travelling everywhere, and I am looking forward to work with you to promote safety, security and prosperity in the region, which is strongly and dangerously jeopardised by the last events. Thank you, President. Thank you, members.
Herr Vizepräsident, ich danke Ihnen für diese umfassende Darstellung der Lage, und wir treten in die Debatte über diese Erklärung ein mit Herrn Michael Gahler.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident, Herr Vizepräsident. Vielen Dank für Ihre Ausführungen. Ich teile sie im Wesentlichen. Wir Europäer müssen unsere Rolle als ehrliche Makler in der Region noch aktiver wahrnehmen. Nachdem sich die Ereignisse in Bagdad und Teheran ohne unser Zutun in den letzten Tagen überschlagen haben, haben wir durch eine Vielzahl von Gesprächskontakten mit zu einer Deeskalation beitragen können. Zu der angeordneten Tötung des Chefs der Al-Quds-Brigaden hat der amerikanische Verteidigungsminister Mark Esper seine fachliche Stellungnahme abgegeben, was die Einschätzung der konkreten Gefährdung amerikanischer Personen und Einrichtungen betrifft. Ich habe dem nichts hinzuzufügen. Im Irak ist der Kampf gegen den IS nicht beendet. Auch hierfür brauchen wir einen funktionierenden irakischen Staat, dessen Regierung keine Marionette Teherans ist. Ich würde es begrüßen, wenn Mitgliedstaaten der EU im NATO-Rahmen oder bilateral ihre Unterstützung der irakischen Streitkräfte fortsetzen können. In diesem Sinne sollten Sie auch Ihre Kontakte in den Irak nutzen und vor allem auch dadurch unsere umfangreiche zivile Wiederaufbauhilfe langfristig sichern helfen. Im Iran sind die Menschen auch über den Abschuss des ukrainischen Flugzeugs empört, insbesondere, dass das Regime sich 3 Tage mit der Wahrheit Zeit gelassen hat. Immerhin hat der Iran jetzt die Wahrheit akzeptiert. Daran sollte sich Russland im Hinblick auf den Abschuss von MH17 in der Ostukraine ein Beispiel nehmen. Aber Iran hat allen Anlass, Abbitte zu leisten. Der beste Weg zu tätiger Reue wäre, offiziell wieder die Verpflichtungen aus dem Atomabkommen zu akzeptieren. Das würde uns in die Lage versetzen, die Möglichkeiten des Zahlungsmechanismus Instex endlich umzusetzen und zusätzliche Sanktionen zu vermeiden. Ich hoffe, im Rahmen des aktivierten Disputklärungsmechanismus kommen wir da zu einer Lösung. Vielen Dank.
Danke, Herr Gahler. Frau Kati-Piri.
High Representative, once again, we Europeans are put before a fait accompli. The American administration and Iran are playing with global security, and as the EU, we are faced with the possible security risks. The assassination of Iranian General Soleimani is the latest of a long series of provocations by the US also since the withdrawal from the Iranian nuclear agreement. And this has created a very dangerous spiral of instability in the region. It is crucial to support your efforts, High Representative, to de-escalate tensions and to save the nuclear deal with Iran. This is even more important since the triggering of the dispute resolution mechanism earlier today. But we must also acknowledge the diverging interests with the current US administration and the American withdrawal from the region. This for us can only mean one thing, that the time has come for a realistic debate on Europe's strategic autonomy to safeguard our own security and interests. We offer, of course, our condolences to the families of the victims of the Ukraine International Airlines flight. And urge the Iranian authorities to allow international observers to undertake a full and transparent investigation. Iran must also refrain from the use of force, like they did in the last weeks, against peaceful demonstrators who took to the streets protesting against the mismanagement and authoritarianism of the regime. And finally, the EU must continue its engagement for unity and democracy in Iraq and, if necessary, step up our support. Thank you.
Thank you. Frau Kollegin Hilde Wautmans. Micro, excuse me, micro. Yes.
Nu gaat het gaan. Meneer de voorzitter, meneer de hoge vertegenwoordiger, collega's. Dit debat gaat natuurlijk over veel meer dan over de uitschakeling van Soleimani. Dit debat moet gaan over hoe Europa, en dan heb ik het ook over de leiders in de Raad, compleet afwezig is in het Midden-Oosten. De terugtrekking van de Amerikanen uit Syrië, de Russen die het overnemen, de uitschakeling van Soleimani. Europa staat erbij en keek ernaar. Wij vernemen telkens via de pers wat onze belangrijkste bondgenoot Amerika uitvreet. We hebben het raden naar een exacte motivering en de timing. En wanneer er dan lukraak lijnvluchten uit de lucht geschoten worden, dan houdt elke Europese burger terecht zijn hart vast. Meneer Borrell, u heeft het terecht fel opgenomen voor de nucleaire deal met Iran. Iran mag nooit een kernmacht worden. En ik wil u dan ook heel hartelijk bedanken, meneer de hoge vertegenwoordiger, voor uw snelle positieinname. Maar dit volstaat niet. Irak dreigt in een nieuwe chaos verzeild te worden en IS dreigt opnieuw vrij spel te krijgen in die chaos. Meneer Borrell, u bent iemand met het juiste gut-instinct. Gebruik dat dus en zorg ervoor dat Europa één stem een rol heeft in het Midden-Oosten. Als we niet willen dat de commissie von der Leyen opnieuw het slachtoffer wordt van een grote migratiecrisis, dan moeten we er volop voor gaan. En u zegt ik heb een mandaat gekregen. Wel, meneer Borrell, ik zou u heel graag op een vliegtuig willen zien vertrekken richting Teheran, richting Washington, om daar met één stem de Europese positie in te nemen, te gaan bemiddelen. Want weet u, de Europese belangen lopen niet samen met de Amerikaanse of de Russische. Als er één iemand is die de Europese belangen moet verdedigen, dan bent u het, dan zijn wij het. Ga ervoor, u heeft onze steun. Dank u wel.
Frau Kollegin, Herr Kollege Ernest Urtasun.
Gracias, alto representante. La verdad que la acción norteamericana asesinando al general Soleimani ha estado a punto de generar un descalabro en toda la región. Ahora, en estos momentos, parece claro, la administración norteamericana quiere terminar con lo que ha sido una creación europea, que es el acuerdo nuclear con Irán, que es el único que nos permite mantener la región en situación de paz, que no se produzca una escalada nuclear y también, quiero recordarlo, el marco que nos permite hablar con Irán de derechos humanos, que todos estamos de acuerdo que debemos hacerlo, pero también el JCPOA es esencial para ello. Hemos leído hoy que se ha decidido activar el mecanismo de resoluciones. Bueno, eso puede tener una doble lectura. Algunos probablemente lo han activado porque quieren llevarlo al Consejo de Seguridad y matar el acuerdo, pero yo creo que debemos intentar utilizarlo como una oportunidad para discutir de todo, para que Irán cumpla con sus compromisos, pero para también hablar de las sanciones reimpuestas que están en estos momentos dañando de una manera muy importante a la población iraní y poniendo en jaque el acuerdo político. Por lo tanto, le apremio, como sé que está haciendo, a que el acuerdo sea defendido con uñas y dientes porque es nuestra vecindad la que está en juego. Muchísimas gracias.
Monsieur
le Président. La communauté internationale s'inquiète légitimement de la récente hausse des tensions en Irak et dans la région après l'attaque de l'ambassade américaine à Bagdad, la frappe américaine qui a tué le général Soleimani et la mort tragique de 176 passagers étrangers au conflit tués par un missile iranien. Dans cette période de tension qui nous rappelle combien le fondamentalisme islamiste, qu'il soit sunnite ou chiite, menace la stabilité du monde, l'Union européenne a montré son inutilité en matière de diplomatie, comme d'ailleurs en matière de défense, et c'est normal. En effet, c'est aux nations qu'il appartient de conduire une politique étrangère au service des intérêts de leurs concitoyens. Si je me réjouis par ailleurs que la voix du Parlement européen n'ait pas été entendue, surtout quand on lit le message de la présidente de la sous-commission CD, exonérant l'Iran de sa responsabilité dans la mort des passagers du vol vers l'Ukraine, je regrette que celle de la France n'ait pas été entendue. La voix de la France aurait dû rappeler les trois axes fondamentaux de notre diplomatie comme puissance d'équilibre et de médiation: le respect de l'intégrité territoriale des États, la lutte contre le fondamentalisme islamiste, qu'il soit chiite ou sunnite, et cette lutte est plus large que combattre le terrorisme, enfin le soutien, la sauvegarde des minorités chrétiennes dans cette région, ces communautés servant de véritables ponts civilisationnels avec nous.
Thank you. Mr. High Rep, Vice President, let me start from another point. The freezing of funds, a result of JCPOA, did not improve lives of ordinary people. Kleptocracy and military build-up prevailed. Thus, mass demonstrations and brutal crackdown of protesting Iranians. There were also matters of concern: meddling in the region, financing of terrorism and support of terrorist organizations, and development of ballistic missiles program, not to speak about recent testing of this in terms of middle-range missiles shot on anti-Daesh bases and downing of the Ukrainian airplane. Despite all of this, I also, like yourself, hope for de-escalation. And I think that triggering of the mechanism is the least you can do, and we can do, the least of all things. I hope that we have our other tools as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Frau Cornelia Ernst ist unsere nächste Sprecherin.
Ja, ich will im Grunde genommen nur eines heute sagen. Die Menschen in beiden Ländern sind nicht nur unzufrieden mit ihren Regierungen, weil die wirtschaftliche und soziale Lage so schwierig ist, brutale Gewalt auf Demonstranten angewendet wird, und sie haben auch Angst vor neuen Kriegen. Nein, die Menschen haben auch gewissermaßen die Nase voll vom Dirigismus des Westens. Und wenn man das mal insgesamt berechnet, seit über 100 Jahren, seit ungefähr einem Jahrhundert, führt das dazu, dass Stabilität und Selbstbestimmung der Völker in diesen Ländern verhindert wird. Erst aus kolonialen Gründen, später aus strategischer Einflussnahme, und was heute ansteht, wissen wir alle selbst. America First, das ist, glaube ich, nicht erst eine Erfindung von Donald Trump, das kennen wir schon seit langem. Und ich finde, es wird Zeit, auf die Menschen zu hören, die dort in diesen beiden Ländern leben, sie zu respektieren und nicht politische Morde zu begehen und verlogene Solidaritätstweets auf Persisch zu versenden. Ehrliches Mitgefühl sieht wirklich anders aus. Und wenn nun das irakische Parlament beispielsweise verlangt, dass ausländische Truppen abgezogen werden sollen, dann ist das ein Ruf nach Unabhängigkeit und endlich die Geschicke in die eigenen Hände zu nehmen. Und dafür sollten wir Unterstützung gewähren.
Danke vielmals. In der ersten Runde ist der letzte Sprecher Herr Papadakis Kostas.
Καταδικάζουμε την επίθεση των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών στο Ιράκ με θύματα μεταξύ άλλων Ιρανούς και Ιρακινούς στρατιωτικούς. Καταγγέλουμε το σχέδιο των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών να κηρυχθεί Μέση Ανατολή επικράτεια του ΝΑΤΟ. Η επικίνδυνη εμπλοκή της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης στο πλαίσιο κλιμάκωσης των ανταγωνισμών για έλεγχο της ενέργειας στόχο έχει να επωφεληθεί η ίδια. Επικαλείται τα ίδια προκλητικά προσχήματα δικαιολόγησης πολέμων όπως στη Ιουγκοσλαβία, στη Συρία, στο Ιράκ, στη Λιβύη, στο Αφγανιστάν που καταδικάζουν τους λαούς σε προσφυγιά και δυστυχία. Εκφράζουμε την αλληλεγγύη μας στις οικογένειες των θυμάτων της αεροπορικής τραγωδίας με το ουκρανικό αεροπλάνο για την οποία έχει τεράστια ευθύνη η Ιρανική κυβέρνηση. Τονίζουμε ότι η απροκάλυπτη στήριξη της ελληνικής κυβέρνησης στην πολιτική των Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών και η διαχρονική τεράστια ευθύνη όλων των ελληνικών κυβερνήσεων που έχουν μετατρέψει την Ελλάδα σε αμερικανονετοϊκό στρατόπεδο θέτουν τον ελληνικό λαό σε μεγάλο κίνδυνο. Να ενταθεί λοιπόν η λαϊκή πάλη για να ακυρωθεί η επικίνδυνη συμφωνία Ελλάδας-Ηνωμένων Πολιτειών για να κλείσει τώρα η βάση της Ούδας και όλες οι βάσεις.
Danke vielmals. Ich darf alle Redner, die sich zu Wort gemeldet haben, informieren, dass ab jetzt alle Redner nur mehr eine Minute für ihre Rede haben, wie Sie wissen. Nur ich möchte es nicht bei jeder Rednerin und bei jedem Redner nochmals wiederholen, nur für Ihre Orientierung. Zu Wort gemeldet hat sich Frau Sara Skyttedal.
Thank you very much. Qasem Soleimani was in every sense of the word a terrorist, and I believe no one in this plenary is mourning. However, it is hard to fully comprehend the potential consequences of the strike. The responses during the upcoming weeks and months will determine which direction this already fragile region will undertake in the near future. Prior to the strikes, protesters from Beirut to Baghdad filled the streets due to their frustration with the Iranian Islamist regime meddling in their internal affairs, wishing that they could determine their own nation's destiny. Iraq remains the most affected country by Iranian meddling, and it needs our support. Mostly it needs stability through sovereignty. And as the chair of the delegation to Iraq, I would ask you, Mr. Borrell, to provide us with details on future EU initiatives regarding Iraq and in which way the External Action Service intends to proceed with our current commitments in the region. Thank you.
Herr Dominik Ruiz-de-Weser.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente. Gracias, señor alto representante, por sus palabras, que yo y mi grupo compartimos plenamente. Es evidente que hay que reducir la tensión en la región, que el asesinato del general Soleimani ha podido tener consecuencias mucho peores de las que hemos visto. Hay que tratar de mantener, como la Unión Europea está intentando, el acuerdo nuclear, que es fundamental para nuestra seguridad. Quizás en esa perspectiva habría que tratar de hacer operativo el mecanismo del INSTEX para poder comerciar con Irán más allá de las sanciones extraterritoriales de los Estados Unidos. La activación del mecanismo de resolución de controversias es lógico en el marco de los incumplimientos y de los anuncios de futuros incumplimientos, pero en todo caso no podemos olvidar también tampoco que Irán es un régimen autoritario que ha asesinado a manifestantes y que financia y patrocina milicias en países como Irak, Líbano, Siria y Yemen. también a Irán para que cese en estas conductas.
I thank Mr Borrell for his statement and echo his words on all the recent lives lost, including those on Flight 752. The E3 initiation of the JCPOA dispute process deserves cautious welcome. Rules-based diplomacy is always better than random insults and threats on Twitter. But was the EU consulted beforehand on this important initiative by 3 of its own member states? And can I check that the British government in particular didn't play Brexit with Middle East peace by blocking higher-level EU involvement? You cannot trust the current British government to stand up to Trump's dangerously unpredictable approach to this region. So desperate are they for a US trade deal. Indeed, our clueless Prime Minister has just called for the replacement of the current Iran peace deal with a Trump deal, contradicting his own Foreign Secretary, who says the UK is still committed to the JCPOA. I hope we all are, and that the EU will now play a more active role in de-escalating tensions and particularly encouraging understanding on all sides of the need for parliamentarians and protesters in both Iran and Iraq to have their say without fear of disproportionate reprisals and response. Thank you.
Danke, Frau Kollegin Hanna Neumann.
Dear colleagues, the EU should use the dispute resolution mechanism to save the Iran deal, and we urgently need to step up our efforts, mediate between USA and Iran, include other regional actors, and help to further de-escalate the situation. This has been addressed already, so let me add another important aspect. The killing of Soleimani threatened to overshadow the voices of those protesters who had been calling for political reforms in both Iran and Iraq for months. But since Friday, they are back in the streets, despite mounting threats again, and they are even louder. And I also want to see EU action on this, to protect them from violence and killing, to fill the void that a withdrawal of US forces would leave in Iraq, and to use all diplomatic ways to send a clear message to the Iranian regime. Yes, we need to deal with the big power politics, but there will never be peace in the region if the voices of those in the streets are silenced once more.
Schön. Herr Kollege Jaak Madison.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I want to thank the previous speaker because she told very serious things. Well, they're true. We have to understand that the Islamic regime has been very totalitarian and hardly Islamic for the last 40 years. So we have tried to negotiate with the Iranians for several years to protect the human rights, rule of law, all our values, what we are promoting all the time. But as we've seen, it's not very successful. And now, if Americans have eliminated one of the leading guy from Iran who's responsible for the paying for the terrorist organizations, for the murderings, for the attacks in Israel, in Yemen, and Lebanon, I'm hearing a lot of Europeans who are saying, oh, it's unacceptable. We have to punish the Americans for that. We have to remind that Americans, in this case, are allies. So in this case, there is a very simple question. Do we show up to support for the Americans to hold the stability? And for the first week, we see that it has been successful because the Iranians have been afraid of Americans. We should support more them. Thank you very much.
Dankeschön. Dear colleague, I have a blue card. Do you accept the blue card?
Of course, as always.
Of course. Mr. Koluglo.
So I would like to ask you, when there is no state of war, killing somebody, an official of one country in another country, is against the international law. Are you in favour of respecting the international law or not?
Herr Kollege Madison.
Yeah, of course, but I do agree with your interpretation of the international law. Is it against the international law if you eliminate one of the leading terrorists? Is it really breaking international law? I don't think so. In Baghdad, there was attacks against the US embassy. It's an attack against the country and sovereignty, and Iran has never said that they were not responsible for these attacks. So if I say now about international law, I will say that they were exactly following the international law, protecting their own country in Baghdad, where they were allowed to be.
Unsere nächste Sprecherin ist Madame Asita Kanko.
Thank you. The Iran crisis is the first test of the new geopolitical commission. The jury is out on whether it has passed. We all agree that General Soleimani will be missed as much as Tufekh. His death came after years of brutal action and weeks of Iranian escalation. However, since his death, the United States has probably avoided a war through chance rather than through strategy. The EU was right to seek de-escalation and to push the Iranian response to be limited. Unfortunately, 176 innocent people became victims to this situation. The EU's role right now is critical. While Europe's actions must never be driven by Iranian intimidation, we should continue to de-escalate. We should get Iran back to the table and prevent its nuclear ambitions, and work with Iraq to maintain the anti-ISIS coalition. We have stepped back from the brink of war. But getting everyone around the table will require solid European leadership, and I'm not saying it right now. Thank you.
Merci. Herr Mick Wallace.
Thanks, President. The crazy decision of the US to carry out the illegal assassination of Soleimani and Abu Mahdi al-Mohandes and others is just the most recent testament to the fact that the US is the most reckless, destabilising and dangerous political and military force on the planet at the moment. The US and their allies claim to be fighting a war on terror whenever they drop bombs and kill people. And here they've taken out some of the people who have done more to fight ISIS than anyone else that we know. They've been asked to get out of Iraq. Are they going to get out of it? Are they going to recognise the democratic decision? They claim to have brought democracy to Iraq. Are they going to respect it now? Commissioner, do you not agree that this region will be a safer place when the Americans are not in it? You talk about Iran not respecting the nuclear agreements. Do you ever ask any questions of Israel? What in God's name, why won't Europe show a bit of courage and stand up to the terrorism of America?
Danke, Herr Kollege Vizepräsident Castaldo.
Signor Presidente, il nuovo anno si è aperto con una crisi dai risvolti potenzialmente drammatici. L'uccisione mirata da parte del Pentagono del generale Soleimani, alto ufficiale iraniano e probabile erede dell'Ayatollah Khamenei, è stata un'azione unilaterale, irresponsabile e illecita dal punto di vista del diritto internazionale, peraltro attuatasi all'interno del territorio di uno Stato terzo, l'Iraq. Ciononostante, pensare che dietro le azioni di Trump non ci sia una ben definita strategia è tanto erroneo quanto ingenuo. Si tratta di una strategia muscolare, spregiudicata, basata sui rapporti di forza e quindi finalizzata a soddisfare gli obiettivi strategici americani. Quale può essere il nostro ruolo europeo di fronte a un'agenda che conta di piegare il governo iraniano tramite azioni di forza mirate e un uso massiccio di sanzioni economiche che stanno mettendo in ginocchio la popolazione iraniana? Vista la risposta militare ponderata di Teheran, abbiamo di fronte a noi un importante spiraglio negoziale. Credo che come Unione sia necessario rispondere positivamente all'apertura del ministro Zarif, assurgendo al ruolo di mediatori in modo chiaro, trasparente ed equilibrato, campioni del multilateralismo, ripartendo dall'accordo sul nucleare per ampliarlo e, se necessario, difenderne fortemente l'essenza.
Danke, Herr Kollege. Unser nächster Sprecher ist Herr Radoslav Sikorski.
Mr. Chairman, I rather side with those who think that the United States was in its right to eliminate General Soleimani, who was an unashamed organizer of terror all over the region for many years. In fact, General Soleimani is the embodiment of the problem that we have with Iran, namely that it's both a country and a cause of spreading the 20th century third utopia, which is to say theocracy. And this is the problem we have with Iran, that while we sometimes have to deal with the regime, its nature prevents Iran from becoming like a normal, responsible stakeholder. The Iranian people are protesting again. They would like to live in a normal country. Yes, we should do whatever we can to help, but we should not exaggerate what we can do for them, because there is very little we can do, particularly when we act on a national basis. This is a high-stakes game. In the short term, at least it looks like President Trump has prevailed, but it needs a united approach of all of Europe and a loyal support for you, High Representative, of the Member States. Thank you.
Danke, Herr Kollege Sven Mikser.
Thank you. Over the past 2 years, we have seen Iran and the US climb up a very dangerous ladder of escalation that has led to the killing of Soleimani and the downing by Iran of the Ukrainian airliner. I want to make here 2 points. First, no one can deny that Soleimani played a hugely destructive role in the region, and he did have blood of innocent people on his hands. And second, I do believe that Europe needs a US that is fully engaged in international affairs and is ready to take on tyrants and bullies on the global scene. However, I believe it's also absolutely critical that the US plays that global role in a responsible manner, fully consistent with international. Moreover, when it takes action
And let's not forget, the CCPOA is embodied in a United Nations Security Council resolution. It's not something that we have been written one night here together, the Europeans. It took 10 years to reach this deal. And it was approved by a United Nations resolution, which nobody has cancelled. It's still alive. So don't blame me. Say, Mr. Borrell, you have to change your mind. I'm coming here to explain not my mind also, but mainly what the Foreign Affairs Council, after a long debate, has decided, and what the letter of the three ministers says. For sure, we are strongly engaged to defend the Iraq sovereignty and its territorial integrity, and the importance of Iraq ownership on the country internal political and reform process. And when my colleagues in the Foreign Affairs Council tell me, mandate me to do whatever I can and use all the tools of diplomacy and to talk with everybody, everybody means, I said it again, everybody, in order to look for a regional political solution, I understand as an invitation to keep in touch with the Iraq government. Well, by the time being, the Iraq government is a caretaker government, but immediately after, this meeting was on Friday, and immediately after I kept in touch with the Iraq government, even if it is a caretaker government, and on Monday, the Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of Iraq was here, having political consultation with the Secretary General of the European External Action Service, and we agreed that we have to do more, and someone has asked me who and how can do more. Well, just by developing the association agreement that we signed, was ratified, entered into force in 2018, just by doing that, well, it's a lot of things. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of possibilities. We have a mission there. We can reinforce this mission. This association agreement opens the door to a lot of relationship on trade and economics, on security, and for sure also we have to decide what are we going to do from the point of view of the foreign and security, defence and security policy with the mission that we have there, and the most sound thing would be to reinforce it in order to help the Iraqi government to avoid any kind of the country falling apart. Because after listening to all of you, I understand that all of you are completely aware of the very dramatic consequences that for our security could come if in Iraq we have a crisis similar to the one we have been witnessing in Syria. And that's why in the next weeks or days I will be engaged in a diplomatic consultation with Iraqis and offer our support and our help in order to continue the reform process in this country and avoid losing all the process and progress that has been made in the last years. We can discuss a lot about which is going to be the future, but by the time being, one thing is clear. Iran is not a nuclear power today, thanks to the JCPOA. And I don't see how can we build an alternative agreement. I really don't see it. Everybody talks about this deal. Some of you have taken the curiosity of having a look at it. It's a book like this, thick like this, full of technicalities. It took 10 years to agree on. I really don't believe it's going to be quite easy to build another agreement with the same complexity, dealing in a much more complex and conflictual environment with the current situation. So that's why I have to insist that for us Europeans, and I am talking on behalf of the Council of Foreign Affairs, we have to do whatever we can in order to make this deal survive, and for that, for sure, we have to push and influence to the Iranians in order to fulfill all their commitments. But let me tell one thing. I think I already told you at the beginning. The Americans withdraw unilaterally of this deal. And the Iranians has been respecting its obligation for 14 months without any kind of counterpart. Now, for sure, they have said that they don't feel binded by the constraints from this agreement. But one thing is not to feel binded, and another thing is to go on the other side. And there, only the Energy Atomic Agency can tell us how much and when it has happened. And that's why you have to rely on the reports of this agency that until now has been a wise testimony of what is happening there. More engagement with Iraq, and try to deal with all parts of the nuclear deal in order to keep it alive. For sure, I can also talk about the Ukraine airplane. I can talk and try to answer to all the many interesting issues that you have been raising during your interventions, but unhappily, it would be too long. Let me just say thank you for your contributions. I am sure we will continue having to deal with this issue in the Parliament. Thank you.
And we thank you, Mr. Vice President, High Representative. And the debate is then closed. Before we move to the next point, I have a short announcement. Mr. Lance Foreman will leave the non-attached members and become a member of the ECR group as of 15th of January 2020. The next item on the agenda is report by Mrs. Wieseler-Lima, Annual Report 2018 on the human rights and democracy in the world and the European Union's policy on the matter. I remind you that it's possible to request catch the eye and blue cards using both the standard registration and the electronic system. Instructions are available at the entrance of the hemicycle. And now I will give the floor to the rapporteur for 4 minutes, Mrs. Wieseler-Lima. The floor is yours.
The European Parliament has a responsibility to speak firmly, clearly, and in a united way when it comes to the question of human rights. Therefore, throughout negotiations on this report, I have striven to achieve consensus so that we can put to the vote a report that expresses the convictions of all of us and that can be supported by a very large majority in this House. But this united voice is not an end in itself. It makes it possible, in a context where we aspire to universality, to emphasize our common respect for human rights, for human dignity. In our European Parliament, the affirmation of the importance of human rights is something that must go beyond the boundaries of political groups. It is by supporting these universal values that allow us to be credible in our international relations when we call for respect for human rights. Particularly this time, the voice of Europe is increasingly necessary given the state of human rights in the world. The report expresses deep concern at the attacks on democracy and the rule of law. A point of particular concern to myself is the rise of totalitarianism as a political project. We don't want, of course, to fall into pessimism, and the report welcomes the fact that in some countries peace processes and processes of democratization are underway, as are judicial and constitutional reforms. And I also stress that civil society's commitment to democracy and human rights is greater than ever and enjoys greater visibility than ever before. So we support those who dare to defend democratic values. But there is a particular black spot as far as humanity is concerned, and that is the scourge of conflict and military attacks seeking to achieve ethnic cleansing is continuing to claim many innocent lives, and extreme acts of violence outside all lawful contexts is an expression of the kind of inhumanity that men can fall into. And we see opening up a space of horror and cruelty that is beneath, beyond words. We all should denounce these acts where we can, and as members of this Parliament, it is a political responsibility on our part to do all that we can to work against such miserable behaviour. The report stresses the importance of promoting equality between the sexes and the rights of women and girls in the world. They are particularly vulnerable and particularly likely to fall victim to abuses and to violence and to exploitation. The report emphasises freedom of expression and the pluralism of the media, which lies at the heart of a genuinely democratic society. It denounces injustice against human rights defenders, academics, journalists and politicians, and it condemns murders committed as well as the application of the death penalty and arbitrary imprisonment. It stresses that human rights and trade must be mutually enhancing, and stresses the importance of corporate social responsibility. It stresses the importance of human rights dialogues in the world and the role of that in promoting human rights. It also stresses that freedom of thought, freedom of conscience, freedom of religion and belief must be guaranteed throughout the world and preserved unconditionally. Finally, I would like to very sincerely thank all of the shadow rapporteurs and all of their teams for the spirit in which we have all worked together on this report. Thank you.
Merci. Now I would like to give the floor to the Vice President, High Representative, Mr. Borrell. The floor is yours.
Madam President, honourable members of the European Parliament, once again I have to thank the European Parliament for its continued monitoring of the human rights and democracy situation across the world. And today I have to welcome your comprehensive annual report on human rights and democracy in the world, which provides many useful recommendations. Thank you to the rapporteur, Madame Isabel Weisler-Lima, for her work. I have to start saying that human rights and democracy are and must remain at the heart of our work. It's part of our A&D. At the very first Foreign Affairs Council meeting I chaired in December, we discussed with all EU foreign ministers our collective efforts to protect and promote human rights and democracy, taking into account the worrying trends, including shrinking space for civil society and increasing attacks on human rights defenders. The ministers agreed on the political appropriateness of establishing an EU global human rights sanction regime, and work on this is being taken forward in the Council, and we hope to move forward as quickly as possible. This global human rights sanction regime is one of the targets, one of the purposes, objectives that we have all together to try to get as soon as possible. On my second day in office, I engaged with grassroots environmental human rights defenders from across the world at the Human Rights Forum, focusing on how to build a fair environment for the future. Many of the issues that you address in your annual report on human rights and democracy, which was adopted in May last year, many of these issues were already addressed in this report. And we delivered a streamlined and short report using concrete country-specific examples. We are fully aware of the strong interlinkages between the two reports. And for the next EU annual report covering 2019, you are aiming at a timely adoption this spring. Your report calls for a more effective human rights foreign policy. It's a welcoming contribution to the ongoing work on the new action plan on human rights and democracy. This will be a roadmap setting the EU level of ambition and priorities for the next 5 years, and it will reflect the transition to a digital world and the changing geopolitical dynamics. Human rights and democracy are and should continue being at the centre of our relations with third countries. The European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights is the largest financial instrument in the world, the largest in the world, dedicated specifically to human rights and democracy, and payments for 135 million were made under this flagship in 2018. Let me put some examples. The 2018 Global Call for Proposal led to the selection of 5 projects on LGBTI rights, 70 million spent on that. They cover such difficult countries on this subject like Russia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Colombia, Peru. These projects supported capacity building of specialised NGOs and offer legal aid to victims of LGBTI-related human rights violations and to human rights defenders. Beyond development cooperation, your report correctly points out that trade economic policies should be linked to political dialogue and that human rights violations should be fully taken into consideration in any action that the European Union is undertaking. You are very well aware of our human rights guidelines, the regular dialogues and strong public diplomacy. We have a special representative for human rights that has reached out to governments and civil society globally, and his leadership has already raised considerably the profile of European Union human rights policy. In particular, the European Union has contributed to moving forward on rights of the child, and together with a group of Latin American and Caribbean countries, we have been tabling 3 resolutions on the right of the child. 2 were presented during the March session of the Human Rights Council. One concerned the 30th anniversary of the human rights of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and the second focused on empowering children with disabilities for the enjoyment of their human rights, including the right to inclusive education. Your report also correctly draws attention to the rising backlash against women's rights worldwide. The EU remains strongly committed to the full enjoyment of human rights by all. Our broad commitment to gender equality and women's empowerment is demonstrated in particular by our Spotlight initiative on ending violence against women and girls, signed in September 2017 in New York. This initiative is backed by a substantive 500 million investment over the period 2018-2024. 2 pillars were implemented: the Latin American pillar against the gender-motivated killing of women, and the Sub-Saharan pillar to prevent and eliminate sexual and gender-based violence and harmful practices. These need to remain at the forefront of our efforts, particularly in view of the 25th anniversary of the World Conference on Women and the Beijing Declaration. Also, your report welcomes the Council conclusions on democracy of last October and highlights the significance of transparent, inclusive and credible elections. And this requires for me to thank the member states and also the members of this Parliament who have joined our election observation missions. This election observation mission structure is a good example of how our institutions are working efficiently together. I don't want to deploy the whole list of those missions, but I just want to point some of them: Salvador, Kosovo, Malawi, Mozambique, Nigeria, Senegal, Sri Lanka, Tunisia. I am sorry that we were not in the last elections in Bolivia. We are going to amend it, and we will continue doing such an important work in order to defend the basis of the human rights, which is an efficient democracy. Mr. President, in this case, let me say that this exchange of views was very useful. At the end, I will say, I am sure, that when I hear to you, Ms. Rapporteur, I found in your works the same aim that moves the service I have the responsibility in order to work together on this issue. Thank you very much for your work. I am sure that now I can have more information about what do you pretend, what do you ask to the External Action Service to defend human rights all over the world, because you, European parliamentarians, and us, people working on our missions all over the world, are trying to fight for the same purpose. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I will open the debate on behalf of the group of the European People's Party. For 1 minute, Mr. Tomak, please.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. Thank you, Vice President Borrell. I'd like to thank the rapporteur for her very good work. This is a very good report, and it shows very clearly that the European Union is putting a lot of effort into defending human rights and democracy around the world. Let me just focus on one fundamental right that our society really respects and which unites us around the world and makes us very influential, and that is the freedom of expression. Vice President Borrell is asking should ask the European External Action Service to do more when it comes to the freedom of expression in our neighbouring countries, because it's unacceptable that in a neighbouring country like Turkey, hundreds of media outlets have been shut down, thousands of journalists have been laid off, and some of them have been arrested unfairly. It's very important to defend this right, because the freedom of expression is a fundamental right in our democracies. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, on behalf of the group of the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, for 1 minute, Mr. Cozzolino, please.
Sì, grazie.
Thank you. It is neither ritual nor bureaucratic to have this discussion on human rights in the Parliament. Actually, as we've heard, the vote and adoption is happening too late, more than a year and a half late. The work that we've done has allowed us to focus on many different issues, and colleagues in the S&D group will highlight the new passages in the report. Now, for me, I think that it's good that we're focusing on how to make EU's policy for safeguarding human rights in the world more effective is very important. Impunity, that is something we've tried to place at the centre. We need to focus on this. The challenge, then, of coming up with new instruments and new powers to counter impunity that's ever more widespread. This is our commitment, it's our responsibility, and future reports will need to focus on this more. So it's very important to make this an important part of our identity, no ifs and buts, to win the challenge on human rights. Now, I'm imagining the forthcoming G20. We have to raise this. We have to put human rights, for example, in Saudi Arabia, on the agenda.
Thank you. Now, on behalf of the Renew Europe group, for 2 minutes, Monsieur Guerrens, please.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. The annual debate that we have on the human rights reports contain a certain risk. There's a risk of this becoming a routine when we discuss the question of human rights in the world. There is a risk that we keep on saying the same thing, that we use forms of words which seem to be repeated year after year. But today is different. We can cast aside those concerns because we've got a very well thought through report, one that is very well structured, and it is as precise as is possible. Mrs. Wiesler Lima's report really is a point of reference for the weeks and months and possibly even years to come when it comes to human rights debates. Virtually all issues are covered without getting bogged down in too much detail. And she sets out the overall trends that we witness with regard to human rights in the world. And among those overall trends, she deplores the rollback of multilateralism. When you say that multilateralism is being rolled back, that represents an abandonment of a great deal that has been achieved in defense of human rights. It's also a reflection of the fact that even in Europe, even in the Council of Europe, and even the Atlantic Alliance has been undermined in this way, and we even see members of the European Union that are affected by this rollback. So, in that context, I would like to ask the European Commission what steps they intend to take in response to this report. In former years, I have presented a report on banning forced marriages and marriages of children. And in the European Parliament, we have adopted by a large majority a proposal to end child marriage and forced marriage, and to make this a precondition for pursuing relations with third countries. So I hope that is still a possibility.
Thank you very much. Now, Madam Neumann for the Greens, 1 minute.
The human rights situation is worsening globally, and that is why it's important that we hold all those accountable that violate human rights. But it is even more important that we start using the leverage that we as European Union, with all its member states and its economic strengths have, that we use it to protect all those fighting for democracy and human rights. Why is it that trade deals can protect business but not humans? Why do European companies still make a fortune selling weapons to warmongers? Why can so many human rights defenders still not come to the EU if they need protection? And why is it that European companies still destroy the livelihood of so many indigenous people only to mine coal? Mr. Borrell, with this report, we want to change those things. It's a strong report. It's carried by a very large majority in this House. And I hope it will guide your work for the next 5 years. And thank you, Isabel Wiesler de Lima, for your great work on this.
Thank you very much. Next, Baldassare. 1 minute. President, colleagues, today I'm here to ask and urge you not to be complicit in this shameful business about $6 billion, surrogate maternity. It's expanding throughout the world where rich Western people are exploiting women from poor countries. It's a new form of colonization, or worse than that, slavery. Let's work together against this shameful practice that flouts human rights and the dignity of women. Innocent children taken away from mothers become a mere contractual object, flouting Article 7 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This Parliament already raised it in 2011 and 2015 against this undignified treatment of women's body and vulnerable girls. Today, we think that protection of women should not just be empty words. It's essential for the EU, who claims to be first human rights champion, to act against surrogate maternity. Children are not a commodity. Women are not incubators. We need your help. Thank you. And next, Czarnecki, please. 1 minute for the ECR.
Thank you, Madam President. High Commissioner, during 2/3 of your speech, the screens displayed information that you are speaking in the Iran-Iraq debate. I'm happy that this has now been brought up to date, but I've been receiving messages on my phone that this is a bizarre situation. Let me say this. I'm very happy that me in the European Parliament, we have a sense that we are the institution which is showing the democratic standards to others worldwide. And that's a good thing. I observed elections in 20 different countries, and I know that our election observation missions make sense. But honestly speaking, the situation is such that we ourselves have to keep up certain democratic standards. I can't understand the situation because I've just received information. I pointed this out, that there was a mistake with the screen. This wasn't a part of my speech, so I hope you can give me some extra time. I couldn't understand the situation where yesterday a debate was refused on what happened in Paris. The speaker is cut off.
Next is Mr. Urban Crespo, 1 minute. For the GUI NGL.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. 2018 was a year characterised by a rise of intolerance, hatred and discrimination. It was a year of an increase of political violence against human rights defenders and environmental defenders. A number of people were assassinated, and today we're still asking for justice. But it was also the year in which women, in the wake of the rise of the right, came out into the street to recall that there'll either be a feminist, the revolution will either be a feminist one or it won't happen. It's also the year when, ladies and gentlemen, we have to recall that there have been violations of human rights in Europe. But we have the Moria refugee camp, for example. There are even similar camps similar to Guantanamo here in Europe. So let's stop insisting on what other countries are doing with regards to our rights when we, on our own turf, with our own multinationals, continue to violate human rights. We've got to change this policy. We've got to stop violating human rights, even in Europe. And we've got to stop this in governments and multinationals operating in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Mr. Castaldo for the non-attached 1 minute. Thank you, President. Colleagues, tomorrow we're going to be voting on the annual report on human rights and democracy. In this first report of this new Parliament, it's very important once again to speak out even more firmly on the importance of fundamental values, which is the cornerstone of the EU: multilateralism, human rights, defence of minorities. It's only if we remember who we are that we can ensure that we act in a way that's in line with these principles. I'd like to thank Isabel, the rapporteur, for the excellent work done and that she was able to bring together the different positions within the different committees. This strategic document expresses our deep concerns about maintaining democracy, human rights and the rule of law. 2019 was a year with more and more alarming authoritarian trends and a lack of use of international bodies to resolve disputes. It is now ever more urgent for the EU to be an example for the international community. It's a priority for us in this Parliament to focus on human rights being central in the EU, High Representative, and our allies have to respect these common rules. Thank you. Thank you very much. And now Mr. Van Dalen, 1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. I see that Mr. Borrell is a bit busy with his phone, so I'll wait until he's got his headphones on so that he can hear me. It is unfortunately necessary to emphasize the importance of freedom of religion and belief in the world in the report. Belief and faith is the most important thing for billions of people on this earth. People wish to be able to worship in their own way, but in many countries people are regularly persecuted or risk their lives because of their religion. At the hands of non-state and even state actors in Nepal, Nigeria, Somalia, Saudi Arabia, this is the case. On the one hand, the High Representative condemns these attacks against people for their religion on a regular basis, but the EU continues to pursue trade relations with these countries where these crimes are being committed. So they should really act according to what they say.
Thank you very much. And now, Santos, 1 minute, please.
A apresentação deste relatório não é o mero cumprimento de
The presentation of this report is not just talking about a ritual or bureaucratic process. No, it's a real attempt at dialogue and consultation, which will mean changes in the daily lives of thousands of people. So I'd like to personally thank the rapporteur, Mrs. Wiesler Lima, and the shadow rapporteur for our group. Now, there are lots of things to say, but we haven't got much time, so I'd just like to underline a couple of important points. The importance given to civil society at a time when their space for action is shrinking is very important. And then there's the importance of the freedom of expression and democracy as well. There's a reference made to shoring up the fight against impunity and the importance of protecting indigenous peoples as well. They are more and more exposed to all kinds of different threats. More than 70 million people are forcibly displaced. That's referenced. And then there's also mention made of the inequalities between men and women. There are many things more things that unite us than those that divide us, and this is also a reminder of the very important work that we have to do here in the European Parliament.
Thank you very much. Now, Madam von Wiese.
Thank you, Madam President, colleagues. Do you know where your Christmas cards were made? In December, a young girl in the UK found a message in one of her charity Christmas cards pleading for help. It was not the sender. It was from the person who was forced to make the card in a Chinese prison cell in inhumane conditions. Consumers in the richest countries of the world enjoy cheap throwaway products and turn a blind eye to the real cost. Manufacturers and retailers, including many European household brands, do not know and do not want to know what happens at the bottom of their supply chains. We must act urgently to have EU-wide legislation that makes supply chain due diligence mandatory. Companies must ensure that the low price of their products is not at the expense of human rights or the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Madam Hautala, 1 minute.
Mr President. High Representative, I want to highlight the strong call by this Parliament for legislation on human rights due diligence for European enterprises, because of course the enterprises must take their share of addressing global challenges. And it's wonderful to see that more and more responsible companies call for mandatory due diligence legislation, especially at the European level, because they want a level playing field and they don't want to be competed out from the market by irresponsible companies. So we have to make sure that we encourage responsibility and not irresponsibility. It's very important to guarantee access to remedy for victims of corporate misconduct. And may I just remind you that this is the so-called third pillar of the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights. And the EU has done very, very little, if anything, on this one. So 2020 must be the year of action, and when the EU acts, the impact reaches far beyond the EU's borders.
Thank you very much. And now, Roughton, 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Madam President. This report shows that in many countries, human rights are still trampled underfoot. To promote human rights, therefore, must remain an important spearhead of our European foreign policy. I'm thinking in particular of protecting the rights of the child and of people with a disability. I'm thinking of the need to combat the persecution and use of violence against people for whatever reason, whether it is on the grounds of belief, ethnicity, or sexual orientation. Now, Madam President, throughout the world, Christians are the most persecuted religious group. So my question is, what is the situation of the EU Special Envoy for religious freedom and belief? This Special Envoy is an important institution, and the mandate of that envoy should be strengthened. What is the status of this EU Special Envoy for religion and belief at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Comín Oliveros, 1 minute. Colleagues, Rapporteur, we agree, I believe, that the power of the EU in the international arena has to be based on the defence of human rights. But how can the Union have the moral authority to require the respect of human rights in the world if there are states within the EU that are not even capable of respecting these same rights in their own countries? And of course that includes economic and social rights, but also civil and political rights. Mr. Junqueras isn't here today because Spain is not respecting its political rights. And today I'm an exile in Belgium because Spain is not respecting the human rights of the Catalan independent leaders, Turkey, China, Russia. They've recently been saying we're following Spanish standards. Now, if the EU turns a blind eye when one of its member states is clearly violating human rights, it is losing any moral authority to require others than to respect rules that it is not respecting itself. Thank you.
There is a question of the blue card. Would you accept the blue card for 30 seconds? No, he doesn't accept. I'm sorry. So we continue with colleague Arena. 1 minute.
Well, I wasn't sure if it was my turn because up on the screen there it says that Kokalari has the floor.
Ah, yes. Sorry, my mistake. Yes, Mrs. Kokalari, sorry. But it's also 1 minute, I'm sorry. Yes, I already crossed you out when the blue card came in, so please.
Okay.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam President. We see to our worry that democracy around the world is backsliding now and that there is oppression of free medias and different thinking that has increased. Violence against women is the most common kind of violation around the world. And at the same time, you have China and Russia that are moving forward in their positions. And at that time, now, we need Europe needs the EU more than ever. And I'd like the Commission to prioritise three important things. First of all, we need to have sanctions issued to those people who carry out major violations of fundamental rights. And then the demand on democracy in the European Union and on accession countries must be stricter, but we must give these countries hope that their future is within the EU and not anywhere else. And then the European Union must take more responsibility when it comes to improving the rights of women and children around the world. We have to promote the idea of protecting fundamental rights and democracy. That's what the EU is for. That is why then we must come out and take that stance and say that we take this very, very seriously. It's not to be taken for granted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, Madam Arena, 1 minute.
Thank you. 70 years after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, we live in a world where the respect of these rights is more than ever. The situation of human rights defenders is alarming. Millions of people throughout the world are being deprived of fundamental rights. Untrammeled globalization is sacrificing thousands of people on the altar of profit for multinationals and their shareholders. Not to mention the rise of authoritarian regimes, which also impose discrimination and unrespectful regimes. So for how long can we continue to resist this? It is part of our responsibility, it is part of our credibility to be a driving force in the world, to defend human rights in a consistent way, of course, which means that this should be taken into account in all of our policies, whether they be diplomatic or trade policies, whether it's a question of association agreements or whatever. We have to defend human rights. They must remain the distinguishing feature of the European Union. And Mr. Borrell, you can count on us to support you in this difficult task, but it is an extremely noble one that falls on you today.
Thank you very much. And now, Madam Rodriguez Ramos, 1 minute, please.
Gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, President. Mr. Comín, in democracies such as my country, Spain, human rights are respected, and fulfilling the law and respect of the courts that are respecting the rights of citizens is the best guarantee for this. And when your comrade flouted the rule of law, the constitution and the rule of law in Spain, he infringed the rights of Catalonians who had an obligation to respect those. Now, then, having fled from Spanish justice to not show responsibility for his acts, now here you're in this chamber today, you're looking for this is impunity rather than immunity. Now that is what our democracies do then within the EU. Thank you very much. And now, Madam Prickma, 1 minute.
Madame la Présidente, merci aux collègues.
Madam President, thank you, and thanks to the Droit colleagues for the work of their excellent report that we're going to talk about this evening and that I hope is going to win a broad backing in this House at the vote. It's all about freedom of beliefs and expression for the media, and this is at the heart of our democratic society and cannot be curtailed in the name of arguments about terrorism, security or the rule of maintaining of order. We've also got the problem of arbitrary arrests, and that means that we have to continue to defend democracy around the world through our foreign policy, but also by not inadvertently supporting authoritarian regimes. And we are going to face tough challenges as of next month in this House, because we're going to have to ratify the free trade agreement with Vietnam. And today, Vietnam, well, we've seen a big regression in terms of human rights there, plenty of political prisoners as a result of the problems they experienced in 2019. The EEAS has appealed for some reactions in terms of the arrests of bloggers and journalists, so we have to react in a united way, and that means we're being consistent in terms of our human rights policies and our trade policies in the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now, Madam Fitzgerald, 1 minute.
Thank you. First of all, I want to congratulate the rapporteur, Isabel Wiesler Lima, on this report, because, as colleagues have said, this is a most comprehensive report. It's gold standard in terms of human rights. The question is, how will it be responded to? How will it be implemented? It's been sent to a whole variety of important organisations and individuals. Let's make sure that governments and ourselves implement the very best practice when it comes to human rights. Many human rights are under threat with the rise of authoritarianism, and we must also call out the macho leadership that we are seeing around the world. Women's rights are in danger. Let's look to home, make sure that the Convention on Violence Against Women, the Istanbul Convention, that the 6 countries who have not ratified, the 7 actually, ratify that. Let's take a lead role in eliminating FGM around the world. Let's hear all our political leaders speak out around this, and let's make sure that we talk about what is happening to human rights defenders and take action in Europe to protect them.
Thank you very much. Next, Mr. Custer, 1 minute.
Article 2 of the EU Treaty says that the values on which the EU is based are respect of human dignity, freedom, democracy, equality, rule of law, and preservation of human rights. These human rights, of course, don't apply only to EU citizens. They apply to everybody, without exception. But what if you are a refugee in Bosnia-Herzegovina who has been repelled by Croatian border forces for the nth time, who has been beaten, maltreated? That refugees' human rights are literally being trampled on, and we're increasingly seeing refugees' rights being flouted and this is something that really undermines the foundation of values on which the EU is based, and the importance of human rights and democracy in the world. So I think we need to take up a strong position. There is an inalienable right to asylum, and refugees in the EU and in the world enjoy human rights.
Thank you. Let's continue with our colleague Sanchez Amor, 1 minute.
Thank you very much. As Mr. Comín didn't have the gallantry to accept the blue card, let me just remind him that this document concerns human rights and democracy around the world. And that doesn't mean that there aren't important issues in Europe. For example, what happened with the Catalan Parliament on the 6th and 7th of December in 2017, when the rights of the opposition were trampled on. And that is the same right that Mr. Comín is enjoying today, sitting here in this House. And everyone here in this House is respecting those rights when they're right and when they're wrong. So let me just refer to the great work done by Mrs. Wiesler Lima and the other colleagues. You know, it's not just about giving people the Sakharov Prize if you want to be a global actor. We've actually got to pursue policies to protect the people who we put up on the podium here. And we also have to influence these areas with these regimes. And our ability in terms of defence have to be reinforced so that our policy to promote human rights and democracy are also translated into a strong defence policy to deal with the regimes that are under threat. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Madam Follett, 1 minute. I've just seen her.
1 minute ago. Okay. And she's no more there. I can continue with the catch of the eye. So I'm sorry, I only can take 5 of them, but I try to respect all the groups. So we can start with Mr. Possible, our colleague Possible. 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, High Representative. I have one comment on the debate. Human rights are often debated in the European Parliament. We often debate how human rights are violated in different regions in the world. One plea from me be this report a guideline for all of us to pursue in the European foreign policy. We keep calling for preventing the violation of human rights. We want to be more stringent against regions and countries which violate human rights. And I want us to deliver on this promise. I want us to take action in the same way, and I want us to support states who respect human rights.
Let's continue then with about 1 minute.
This report reiterates and supports the European Parliament's resolution passed on May 3rd, 2018 with regard to the protection of migrant children. Last week in the UK, the House of Commons rejected proposals to maintain protections for child refugees in the redrafted EU withdrawal agreement bill. It's a betrayal of Britain's long-standing commitment to humanitarian support, especially to the most vulnerable. I'd like to pay tribute to Labour Lord Alf Dubs, himself a Jewish refugee, who led the campaign on this issue. And I hope the House of Lords rectifies what has been a huge mistake made by the government. If this is what global Britain looks like post-Brexit, it sends out all the wrong messages as to who we are and who we want to be as a nation. Whether in or out of the EU, we must not abandon our commitment to human rights and internationalism. And as a child rights campaigner, I ask all those in positions of power to remember Alan Kurdi and all the other child refugees who died whilst we turned our backs.
Thank you very much. Mr. Austrevicius has the floor now for 1 minute.
Thank you, Chair. Despite of many efforts, the human rights situation in the world is not improving. The scale of crimes and atrocities committed against children, women, ethnic minorities, religious groups, among others, are difficult to grasp even for those with extensive years of work in the field of human rights promotion and protection. The question whether our assessment, reaction and response to occurred violations are the best possible remains open. For example, we are too slow to react to the worsening situation in Cambodia, where attacks on the political opposition, civil society groups and independent media have intensified. Human rights violations also take place by our borders. In Belarus, we see no improvement in political processes, including freedom of assembly and association, free speech and independent media. The political opposition remains suppressed and civil society is sidelined from ongoing negotiations towards losing country's sovereignty to Russia. Thank you, Chair.
And now the last speaker is Wallace. 1 minute.
Thanks very much, Madam President. People say that human rights are under threat, and yes, there's an element of truth to that, but sadly we've lost our moral authority to be talking about human rights the way we used to. The very fact that we ignore the rule of law so often around the world today doesn't do anything for our credibility to talk about human rights. The very fact that we don't oppose the US sanctions in places like Iran and Syria and Venezuela, because those sanctions hurt the poorest people in those countries the most, and Europe should stand up against it. We talk about trade and human rights being mutually enhancing. Well, in Saudi Arabia, they cut off heads on a regular basis, but I don't see Europe having any problem trading with them. And I don't see us having much of a problem dealing with Israel, despite the breach of human rights and international law in Palestine on a regular basis. We are not being consistent in how we behave.
Dankeschön. Damit kommen wir wieder zur...
Thank you very much. Well, we now turn back to the Commission. Vice President, High Representative, you have the floor, sir.
Human rights is an endless issue. So many questions. Let me start answering a very concrete question about our special envoy for freedom of belief. Yes, we have a special envoy, Jean Figel. President Juncker created the function and appointed Jean Figel in May 2016. He supports implementation of the European Union guidelines on promoting and protection of freedom of belief, as the name of his mandate says. He is engaged on visiting countries where the freedom of belief is at risk, engaging with national authorities and institutions, human rights organisations and religious leaders and communities, participates in dialogues with them and promotes respect for diversity. It's a little bit reiteration. I'm saying the same thing in different ways, no? But that's what he's doing. And he also serves as a special advisor to the Commissioner for Development Cooperation. That's what the member who asked the question is no longer here. But this is the answer I can provide to him. I will review the job, the mandate of this special envoy and see how can improve it, or which is the justification of this job in order. The subject requires for sure someone to take care of it, but I will learn more about it because, to tell the truth, I was not aware of the existence of this special envoy for the protection of freedom and belief. Maybe next time I will be able to give more information. The other big issue that has been raised is business and human rights. It is a big issue, for sure. And someone has been saying this Western consumers are very happy to consume goods, cheaper goods, without paying a lot of attention to the way this lower cost has been obtained. It's cheaper. Why it's cheaper? Because it's more efficient, the production procedure, or because the human rights of the workers are not respected as we require them to be respected in our economic system. The European Union is maybe the most engaged organisation in the world on this issue to address human rights abuses connected to the activities of business entities. Already we have binding schemes in areas such as, let me put an example, trade in diamonds, other conflicted minerals, export control over torture goods, and against trade of the lethal injections and the work of the child. I can give you examples about what we have been doing, of some agreements with Asia Pacific, agreements for close cooperation on business and human rights in Asia, where we have been investing more than €5 million on this programme, and we have a similar project ongoing in Latin America. But we need to do more. We need to build up the necessary consensus. I don't have a mandate in order to work more on that. So I come with the right of initiative of the Parliament. You have it, use it, as well, to help me in this task, to which I am very much interested. But you have capacities, use these capacities, because as you know, I am only the representative of a set of people who many times don't agree on every issue. In order to have a mandate, it will be very useful if the Parliament uses its right of initiative in order to build European Union binding treaty. I think this is a very important issue, maybe the most important one worldwide. Which other issue has been pointed for you or by you? Many of them. The EU due diligence legislation. Yes, we have called for further EU due diligence legislation during the previous mandate, and some member states, such as France and Netherlands, have adopted their own national legislation, but others haven't done. Once again, when you deal with a subject which is highly divisive, when you don't have an agreement among member states, it's difficult to advance in something, even if you are strongly convinced that it's needed. And here, again, we can build an alliance between the Parliament, the High Representative, in order to push things that I myself, I will not have enough capacities to develop. I think this session could be a good start for our working together in order to advance on the human rights defence all over the world. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. And finally, to conclude the debate, I will give the floor to the rapporteur, Ms. Wiesler Lima.
Thank you, Mr. Borrell, for all your explanations. Je voudrais encore une fois me faire
Once again, I would like to be the spokesperson for those that I've referred to in the report, and also raise some of the difficulties that have been raised today, that of having multilateral action. It's very important, though, because that is the pillar then to help human rights defenders in difficulty. LGBTI people who experience huge problems in some countries, violence against women and girls, the production chains that are problematic. Companies have their responsibility as well. Forced marriages. So amongst all the issues we've heard about, these are the ones that I wanted to echo. Mr. Borrell, you've talked about the tools that we have. We have observation missions. We have your action as well, the representative of human rights and for freedom of religion. But you have asked what we're asking of you. Some things have come up again and again during the course of working on this report, namely those who are guilty in the area of human rights must not be allowed to enjoy impunity. They have to be prosecuted. There has to be a follow-up. And we've got to do everything we can in that direction. So we have to insist on multilateralism. We have to insist on the business world and trade being conducted in a way that we can be proud of. With that in mind, I'd like to mention the follow-up mechanism that should be in place whenever we talk about trade. Now, it's one thing to call on certain things to be done. It's another thing to have an assessment to make sure that it's really been done. So I hope that in the future progress will be made when it comes to democracy and human rights in the world. And I do hope that we and you will be able to contribute to speeding up progress. Thank you. Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. That concludes the debate, and the vote on this will be tomorrow. And while we call the next item on the agenda, we'll give the High Representative the opportunity of changing sides. We now come to the joint debate on the Common Foreign and Security Policy and the Common Security and Defence Policy. The rapporteur for the annual report, the annual reports, the rapporteurs David McAllister and Arnaud Danjean. You can make use of the electronic system or the blue card to request the floor. So just giving Mr. Borrell time, we will give the floor to David McAllister, rapporteur for the EPP.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, with this year's annual report on the Common Foreign and Security Policy, I believe that we have once again identified the major issues our European Union is facing, and we also outline a possible way forward. The first 2 weeks of this new year have reminded us that the European Union's security environment is today more volatile, more unpredictable, more complex and more ambiguous than at any time since the end of the Cold War. Let me underline 3 main findings of my annual CFSP report. Firstly, multilateralism is at stake. In such challenging times where multilateralism is increasingly called into question, we as a European Union must take a firm stand against this trend, putting multilateralism at the core of our efforts to prevent and resolve conflicts. In the current setting, the CFSP must effectively promote our interests and values in our neighbourhood and around the whole world. We should take advantage of the new political cycle of our institutions to build a stronger, proactive and strategic European Union. Secondly, reinforcing the European Parliament as a pillar of the CFSP. During the past legislature, this European Parliament has played a prominent role in mediation and in the peaceful resolution of protracted conflicts. Our efforts were successful, for instance, in Ukraine and in North Macedonia. These efforts, especially in the framework of the Jean Monnet dialogue, should remain a priority in the upcoming years. We should also strengthen our role in oversight and scrutiny of the CFSP, but also of course, the EU external instruments. In this context, we must aim for a more strategic approach, greater coherence, consistency and complementarity between the external financial instruments and the common foreign and security policy. Thirdly, strengthening the CFSP to counter global threats. I am, for example, convinced that qualified majority voting would make the EU's foreign and security policy more effective and speed up the decision-making process. The need for unanimity is keeping us from being able to act credibly on the global stage. On the EU's common security and defence policy, we need to strengthen the capacity on EU and also on member state level to act autonomously, as well as to foster partnerships with regional organisations. The announcement by the Commission President to build a genuine and operational European Defence Union within the next 5 years is welcome. Colleagues, finally, no single EU member state can respond effectively to today's global challenges on its own. We must continue to promote our European values while staying committed to a rules-based international order and economic cooperation. The European Union is a major player when it comes to diplomacy, trade, development cooperation, humanitarian aid, and step by step also in the field of security and defence. Our European Union should act strategically by using its wide array of policies and instruments to respond to the challenges in our direct neighbourhood and beyond. The time has come as the EU to take our destiny into our own hands and embrace our role as a fully fledged sovereign political and economic power in international relations, and I can only commend what the High Representative Vice President has announced in the first weeks now being in office. I think he has a huge support here in the European Parliament. Finally, I would like to thank all our colleagues for their good contributions, especially, of course, the shadow rapporteurs for a very good and fruitful cooperation. Thank you.
Ganz herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mr. Danjean, who is rapporteur for the second report that we are taking jointly. High Representative, allow me to begin by sincerely thanking all of the shadow rapporteurs from all the political groups. Despite our differences sometimes, everybody has tried to make a substantive contribution to this annual report, and this led to lively discussions, but I think that reflects an interest in an area that hasn't always attracted so much attention in this House. I think we can realistically define the situation with regard to defence, and we've been able to make pragmatic proposals for the future. So the realism in our diagnosis of the situation notes a deterioration in our security environment. All of our neighbourhood is in crisis. I won't go into detail about the conflicts in Syria, in Libya, in Ukraine, or the jihadist attacks at the heart of Europe, or in the Horn of Africa, or the Sahel. All of these crises are taking place at once. They are increasingly interconnected, and unfortunately they send out a sad image of Europe standing by impotently. I think the crisis at our door ought to prompt us to action. Recent examples in the Middle East as well show that we are in confusion, and we hope, of course, that this is just a temporary situation. But this may not be the case. In fact, I think this state of crisis is likely to continue. I think today it is irresponsible as Europeans to think that we can have our security guaranteed eternally by